Hey, my name is Gaia Athena and today I'm going to bring you my February 2019 reading summary. In February I read 21 books. This is a bit less than the 24 that I read in January, but February is a bit of a shorter month, and so yeah, it's still quite a lot of books, so I am fine with this. In this pie chart you can see that I read slightly more in January than in February. This graph will get more interesting as we go along through the year. I read 4,703 pages in February. This is also slightly lower than in January, but again February is a shorter month, so yeah. When we look at the pie chart we see it gets very close to each other. So this graph shows the amount of books per age range per month, and in February I read 14 children's books, 5 books for young adult and 2 books for adults. This is a bit of a change from last year, in which I read more adult books and a bit less books of the other categories. I think the main reason that I've read so many children's books in February is because I went to the library in, I want to say, in like the 3rd or 4th week in January, and so that's why in both months I read quite a lot of children's books, because those are the kind of books I tend to get from the library. In this graph you can see that I had no rereads in February. I only read new to me books. This is a slight change from January and also from the months in last year, where I usually reread about 1 book each month, but in February I didn't reread any books. Then we move on to the genres I read in February. I read 1 fantasy book, 4 science fiction books, 8 contemporary fiction books, no rom-coms, 4 historical fiction books, no literature, no detective and mystery, no thrillers, 2 horror, no paranormal, 2 biographies and memoirs, 1 information book, and no Disney books. The shortest books I read this month were Kepler 62 Book 1, De Uitnodiging, by Timo Pavela, Björn Saltland and Pasi Pitkänen. That was 122 pages. Then we have Vleermuisgespuis by Geronimo Stilton with 128 pages. And we have Het Boek der Raadselen, Prinses van Wonderrijk Book 1 by Thea Stilton, also 128 pages. The longest books I read this month, I read no really long books in February. The longest one was Anger is a Gift by Marco Oshiro. This was 463 pages. Then we have Reis door de tijd 9 naar de haaien by Geronimo Stilton. This was 384 pages. The first Aya omnibus, Aya Live in Yup City by Marguerite Abouet and Clément Aubry, was 375 pages. The Poet X by Elizabeth Acevedo was 361 pages. And An Unkindness of Ghosts by Rivers Solomon was 351 pages. Now, upon reflection, looking back at the books that I read in February, there were some that I enjoyed a lot just after I finished them, but now that I'm thinking about it, like in the beginning of March, there were no books that I absolutely loved this month. So instead I'm just going to give you pretty enjoyable parts 1 and part 2, because yeah. So the first one is Reis door de tijd 9 naar de haaien by Geronimo Stilton. I enjoyed this read a lot. It was an enjoyable read. It was nice to learn more about the periods in history. Yeah. The second one is Het Boek der Raadselen, Prinsessen van Wonderrijk Book 1 by Thea Stilton. And this was also an enjoyable read. It used some of the characters from other books by Thea Stilton, so I think this is a prequel. Then we have Dolfje Weerwolfje Book 18, Griezelwielen by Paul van Loon. I always really enjoyed the main Dolfje Weerwolfje books. Then we have Anger is a Gift by Mark Oshiro. And when I had just finished this book, I quite liked it. But then Christine, from the other Christine that reads, if I'm saying that correctly, she didn't like this book very much, and she had some good reasons for it. And so upon reflection, I had to like put this book a bit lower in my, like, how much I enjoyed it, because she pointed out some issues with it and I thought she had some good points. Overall, I still liked this book. I enjoyed reading it, but yeah, I just, having watched that video, I don't have as fond memories of it, if that makes sense. Then we have De Uitnodiging and De Lancering, Kepler books 1 and 2 by Timo Pavela, Björn Saltland and Pasi Pitkanen. And these, this was an enjoyable start to the series. I look forward to hopefully read more in it at some point. And lastly on this list we have the Aya Omnibus, Aya Life in Job City, by Marguerite Aberwet and Clément Aubry. And I quite enjoyed this book. It wasn't a perfect read, but I liked it a lot. And then again, pretty enjoyable, but then part 2. I couldn't fit it all in one thing without really decreasing the font. So the first book on this list is De Kunst van het Ademen, or in English The Art of Breathing by Danny Penman. And I did not make a review for this book, but I read it based on the recommendation of my psychiatrist. So I didn't really feel comfortable doing a book review of this, because I think it is more a book that I'm going to be referring to again in the future, and that I'll be reading bits out of now and then. And yeah, so I did read the whole book in February, but I think it needs some more thinking, I guess. Then we have The Poet X by Elizabeth Acevedo. I quite liked the story in this book, and I liked the characters. I just didn't quite get on with the format, because the book is written in verse. And I just feel that isn't quite my thing. I've read 2 books in verse now, and I just, yeah, it's just not quite my thing. Poetry is not my thing. So, but other than that, I did quite like The Poet X and the themes of it and the characters and all that. Then we have De Spiegel van mijn Ziel, or Songs of a Guerrilla Nation in English, by Dawn Prince Hughes. This was an enjoyable read. I didn't I didn't totally connect with it on a personal level very much, and I found the writing a bit, I don't really know how to describe it, but it could have been a translation. I don't know about that. But I did really enjoy reading about the author's connection with the gorillas and how she described them and things like that. Then we have Alleen met mijn wereld by Wessel Broekhuis. This was an autism memoir written by a 16-year-old teenage boy. And it was quite impressive, and I enjoyed reading about the author's connection with mellow music. I just didn't quite go on with the chapter about love. And then we have Boerderij op Stelte, De Knotsgekkenwereld van Lotte Weerwaard, book 3 by Alice Pentermuller and Daniela Cole. And this was an enjoyable read. Then Colin's Geheime Channel, book 1, Van Onderdook tot YouTube-ster by Sabine Z. I also enjoyed this read. Yeah, it was nice. And then next up we have the other 2 books that I read in the Lotte Weerwaard series this month. Chaos op de Filmset and Weg met die vieze stinkkaas. And both of these were enjoyable reads as well. When I read these books, I wasn't feeling very well. I had a really bad headache or migraine during the night. I slept really badly. So these books were just what I needed at the time. I think if I were to read them when I'm feeling really, really good, they might be a bit too simplistic for me as an adult. But at the time that I read these, it was just what my brain could handle. So yeah. Then we have Zeesnorren en Monsterdraken by Geronimo Stilton, Normhuizen book 2. And I found this an enjoyable read. And lastly, Expeditie Zonnesteek by Geronimo Stilton, Normhuizen book 3. I am still questioning why it is also book 75 in the main series. I like this book, but I found it a bit similar to book 2. There were some similar elements, which I guess makes sense in children's book series. Just reading them back to back was maybe not the best decision on my part. Then we get to the books that I found somewhat enjoyable this month, and at the start of it there is An Unkindness of Ghosts by Rivers Solomon. This book had a lot of good elements, but there were a couple of things as well that disappointed me. I would have liked for the book to go on beyond the ending. I was a bit disappointed in the autism representation. I did really like the world building and finding out what was going on the ship and the mystery. And there was one, I guess, somewhat important character that I really didn't like. Then we have Vleermuisgespuis by Geronimo Stilton. This book was alright. It was... yeah, I don't have a whole lot to say about that one. Then we have Luna's Schoolramp, Nanda Roep en Sylvester Zwaneveld. This is part of the Plaza Patata series. This book was alright. I thought it was better than the other book I read in the series, which will come in the next bit. And it was an alright read. I will probably remember the scene with the goat poop. But other than that, it wasn't very memorable. And then my disappointments of the month, or least favourite of the month, and that is Luna's Flopfeest by Nanda Roep and Sylvester Zwaneveld, part of the Plaza Patata series. And my main issue with this book was that the villain was, well, let's say the mean girl. She was the only character of colour, and I found this an odd choice. I would rather have seen that one of the good characters, for example, had been a person of colour. It seemed a strange choice to have the only person of colour be the villain, the antagonist, so to speak. And yeah, that brings us to the end of my February 2019 reading summary. Overall, I didn't have the best reading month in February. I read a lot of books from the library in the beginning of the month because I had to read them because they were due, and I then decided not to read my usual graphic novels and a manga in the beginning of the month because I was reading the library books instead. And I kind of missed that. The first while in February, about the first like half or so, I read library books. And there was a bit of a pressure to get them read, so because when I'm at the library I see so many nice things, I want to borrow them all, so I always borrow up to my limit, which is probably not always the smartest thing to do, but I can't help myself. So I was in a bit of a pressure to get all that read. And then for a week I read books for Contemporary-a-thon, and about 2 weeks, including that week of Contemporary, so like the last 2 weeks in February, I read books for Blackathon. And I don't know, I just didn't really have a whole lot of highlights. I mean, I read a lot of books that were pretty enjoyable, so that's really good, and only like a few that were not, well, let's just say not that great. But I didn't have any like really great new favorites or anything this month either. So anyway, thank you very much for watching, and I hope to see you in my next video. Bye!